2 years after I dismantled his career, the disgraced cop who falsely arrested me found me on the street, pulled a gun, and asked if I thought I could just walk away. The Friday air was thick and heavy, the kind that promises a weekend thunderstorm. I was piloting my Lexus down a stretch of state highway I knew by heart, the one that led from the concrete canyons of downtown to the leafy suburbs where my sister lived. It had been a brutal week. We'd just secured a conviction in a massive wire fraud case, a web of shell corporations and offshore accounts so tangled it took my team 6 months just to map it out. My brain was fried. All I wanted was a slice of my nephew's birthday cake and a conversation that didn't involve the phrase prosecutorial discretion. The flash of red and blue in my rearview mirror felt like a personal insult from the universe. I glanced at the speedometer. 65, exactly the speed limit. My signal had been on for the last 100 yards, preparing for my exit. Seatbelt was on. The car's registration and insurance were up to date. I ran the mental checklist out of pure habit. There was no legitimate reason for this stop. Still, I pulled over smoothly onto the shoulder, killed the engine, and rolled down my window, placing my hands at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel. Standard procedure. The kind of thing you do to make sure everyone stays calm. The officer who approached my window did not look calm. He was a big man, the kind whose uniform seemed a size too small, straining at the shoulders and neck. His name tag read Miller. He had a buzz cut so tight you could see the sweat beading on his scalp, and he bypassed my window entirely at first, instead shining his flashlight into my back seat, then onto the passenger seat where my leather briefcase sat. Only then did he rap his knuckles on the roof of my car and lean down, his face a mask of bored suspicion. "License and registration," he said, not as a request, but as a command. His eyes weren't on me. They were scanning the interior of my car, cataloging every detail. The nice leather, the clean dashboard, the suit jacket hanging neatly in the back. "Of course, officer," I replied, my voice even. I moved slowly, deliberately, reaching into the glove compartment for the registration, and then into my jacket for my wallet. I handed them over. He took them without a word, his flashlight beam lingering on my watch. "This your car?" he asked, his tone dripping with insinuation. "Yes, it is," I said. "Where you headed in such a hurry?" "I wasn't speeding, officer. I'm on my way to my nephew's birthday party in Northwood." He grunted, a non-committal sound, as he walked back to his patrol car. I watched him in the mirror. He wasn't running my plates. He was just standing there talking on his radio, looking at my license, then back at me. This wasn't a traffic stop. This was an interrogation that hadn't started yet. A few minutes later, he sauntered back, handing my documents back to me. I thought, with a sigh of relief, that this was it. I was wrong. "You look a little nervous," he said, leaning against the doorframe, crowding my space. "Got something to be nervous about?" "Not at all," I said, keeping my hands on the wheel. "Just trying to get to a family event before the cake is gone." I even managed a small, polite smile. It wasn't returned. His eyes fell back to my briefcase on the passenger seat. "What's in the bag?" "Just my work," I said. "Case files. They're confidential." The word confidential seemed to flip a switch in his brain. A slow, knowing smirk spread across his face. "Confidential, huh?" "I bet they are. I'm going to need you to step out of the vehicle, sir." My internal alarms, which had been buzzing quietly, were now screaming. "Officer, with all due respect, on what grounds?" "You haven't cited a violation, and I do not consent to a search of my person or my vehicle." I said it calmly, professionally. It was the same tone I used in the courtroom. It had the opposite effect I intended. "Oh, a lawyer, are we?" he sneered. "That makes it even more interesting." I said, "Step out of the car. Now." His hand drifted down, resting on the butt of his sidearm. The unspoken threat hung in the air, thick and suffocating. I knew my rights. I also knew that the side of a highway was not the courtroom to argue them. I slowly unbuckled my seatbelt, opened the door, and got out, my heart hammering against my ribs not with fear, but with a cold, rising anger. He pushed me against the side of my own car, the metal cool against my cheek, and began a rough pat-down. He found my phone, my keys, my wallet. Then his hands explored the pockets of my suit jacket, still inside the car. He pulled something out. It was a small, clear plastic baggie with a zip-lock top, containing a few scoops of white powder. "Well, well, well," Officer Miller said, his voice dripping with triumphant satisfaction as he held the baggie up between his thumb and forefinger. "What do we have here? Looks like your confidential business is about to become very public." "That's electrolyte mix," I said, my voice dangerously steady. "For my water bottle. I was working late all week." He laughed, a short, ugly bark of a sound. "That's what they all say." He tossed the baggie onto the roof of my car, pulled out a pair of handcuffs, and reached for my wrists. The click of the first cuff locking into place was deafeningly loud in the evening quiet. He started reciting my Miranda rights, his voice a smug monotone, a script he'd clearly performed 100 times. He saw a man who looked like me, in a car like this, in this neighborhood. He had his story all written. He finished the litany. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Do you understand these rights as I have read them to you?" He yanked my arms back, cinching the cuffs tighter. I turned my head slowly, the rough texture of my suit jacket scratching against my ear, and I looked him dead in the eye. I let the silence stretch, forcing him to meet my gaze. "I helped write the training manual on constitutional policing for this state," I said, my voice as cold and sharp as a shard of glass. "And you, Officer Miller, just spectacularly failed the final exam." For a second, Officer Miller just stared at me, the flashing lights of his cruiser painting his face in alternating shades of red and blue. The smirk on his lips faltered, just for a moment, replaced by a flicker of confusion. But ego is a powerful thing. It's a fortress, and my words were just a single stone thrown against its massive walls. He recovered quickly, his face hardening into a mask of derision. "Is that so?" he scoffed, giving my cuffed wrists a final, painful yank. "Well, Professor, class is over. You're under arrest." He shoved me toward the back of his patrol car, my expensive suit jacket bunching up uncomfortably behind my back. He pushed my head down with unnecessary force and bundled me into the back seat. The door slammed shut with a metallic finality, and I was caged. Through the thick plexiglass divider, I watched him swagger back to my Lexus. He wasn't just searching it, he was violating it. He ripped open the glove compartment, scattering papers onto the passenger seat. He pulled out my gym bag from the trunk and emptied it onto the asphalt shoulder running shoes, a sweaty towel, a water bottle. He was on a fishing expedition, trying to find anything that would justify the unholy mess he was creating. Then he picked up my briefcase. He carried it like a trophy, setting it on the hood of my car. "What's in here?" he called out, his voice muffled by the glass. "The secret to your electrolyte business?" Even from 10 feet away, in the back of a police cruiser with my hands cuffed behind my back, my voice came out with more authority than his. "That briefcase is the official property of the United States Department of Justice. Its contents are classified federal work product. You do not have the clearance to look at it, let alone open it. If you tamper with that lock, you'll be adding obstruction of a federal investigation and tampering with federal property to the list of charges I'll be recommending against you." That stopped him. He stared at the gold government seal embossed on the leather. He looked back at me, then at the briefcase. The gears were turning, but they were grinding. He couldn't reconcile the man in the Lexus with the story he'd already told himself. In the end, his frustration won out. He slammed the briefcase back onto the passenger seat of my car and kicked the door shut, leaving a scuff on the pristine paint. The ride to the station was silent, except for the crackle of his radio and his low, tuneless whistling. He kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror, a smug little smile playing on his lips. He thought he had me. He thought I was just some rich guy with a drug habit and a big mouth. He had no idea that with every passing second, I was meticulously building the case against him in my head. Unlawful stop, no probable cause, illegal search. The planted evidence because that's what it would be considered once the electrolyte mix tested negative. False arrest. A laundry list of civil rights violations, each one a nail in the coffin of his career. At the station, the fluorescent lights hummed with an oppressive buzz. I was paraded past the booking desk, a trophy for Officer Miller to show his colleagues. "Look what I found cruising through Northwood," he announced to the room. I was fingerprinted. My mugshot was taken, the flash blindingly bright. They took my belt, my tie, my shoelaces, and the elegant watch my wife had given me for our anniversary. Every action was a small, calculated act of dehumanization. Finally, I was thrown into a holding cell. The heavy metal door clanged shut, the sound echoing in the small concrete box. Miller stood on the other side of the bars, dangling my car keys. "Not so high and mighty now, are you?" he sneered. "Gonna be a long night. Better get comfortable." He turned to leave, but I called out to him, my voice calm and even. "I get one phone call, correct?" He laughed. "Oh, yeah, your one phone call. Who you gonna call? Your dealer?" He led me out to a grimy phone bolted to the wall in the booking area. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed, ready to enjoy the show. I didn't need to look up a number. I dialed the 11 digits from memory. It rang twice. A crisp, professional voice answered on the other end. "U.S. Attorney's Office." "It's Mark," I said simply. "Put David on the line. It's urgent." Miller's smirk widened. He thought I was bluffing. A few seconds passed, then a new voice, one I knew better than my own brother's, came on the line. "Mark, what is it?" "It's 9 o'clock on a Friday." "David," I said. My eyes locked on Officer Miller, who was now beginning to look a little less certain. "I'm at the State Police Barracks on Route 9. I've been arrested by an Officer Miller, badge number 719. He's got my car, and more importantly, he has the Harrison case files in his possession. I need you to make 2 calls. First, to the State Attorney General. Second, to the captain of this barracks. Inform him that he is currently holding a senior assistant U.S. attorney in his cell, and his officer is in unauthorized possession of sensitive DOJ property. Tell him he has 10 minutes to bring me my phone and my briefcase, or you'll be dispatching the FBI to secure the evidence chain themselves." I hung up the phone. The smirk was completely gone from Miller's face, replaced by a pale, slack-jawed expression. "You're bluffing," he whispered, but there was no conviction in his voice. "Am I?" I said, walking back to the cell and sitting on the concrete bench. "Let's find out together." The next 8 minutes were the longest of Officer Miller's life. He paced, he kept looking from me to the clock on the wall, then to the door leading to the captain's office. The color had drained from his face. Then, exactly as I knew it would, the door swung open with a bang. It was the station captain, a portly man with a salt-and-pepper mustache and panic in his eyes. He wasn't looking at Miller. He was looking directly at me, through the bars of the cell. He held up a keycard. "Open that cell," he commanded Miller, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "Open it. Now." Miller, fumbling with his keys, finally managed to unlock the door. It swung inward. The captain ignored his subordinate completely. He walked right up to me, his expression a mixture of terror and disbelief. "Sir," he began, his voice trembling slightly, "there has been a terrible mistake." I stood up slowly, brushing the dust from my suit pants. I looked past the captain, past the other stunned officers in the room, and settled my gaze on the man who had started this all. Miller looked like he was about to be sick. "The mistake isn't that I'm in this cell, Captain," I said, my voice echoing in the sudden silence of the room. "The mistake is that your officer is still wearing a badge and carrying a gun." The captain's face went from pale to ashen. He seemed to shrink inside his own uniform. The air in the booking area grew thick with a tension so profound you could almost taste the metallic tang of fear. Miller's fear. Every other officer in the room suddenly found something fascinating to look at on the floor, on the ceiling, anywhere but at the unfolding disaster in front of them. The captain, to his credit, recovered a fraction of his composure. He turned his head slowly, just enough to pin Miller with a glare that could have melted steel. "Miller, my office. Now," he snarled. The words like stones spat from his mouth. He then turned back to me, his tone shifting into one of profound, almost groveling apology. "Mr. Prosecutor, sir, I cannot express how sorry I am. Your belongings are right here." He gestured to a sergeant who was rushing forward, holding my watch, my belt, my phone, and my shoelaces as if they were holy relics. My briefcase was placed carefully on the booking counter, its gold seal gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. Your vehicle is being brought around to the front, the captain continued, wringing his hands. We have, of course, confirmed that the substance Officer Miller found was exactly what you said it was. An electrolyte supplement. The lab test was expedited. He was sweating profusely. I took my phone and wallet, methodically putting everything back where it belonged. I didn't rush. I wanted them to stew in the silence. I wanted every single person in that room to understand the magnitude of the line that had been crossed. I slipped my watch back onto my wrist, the familiar weight a small comfort. "Captain," I said, my voice cutting through the quiet, "do you have an internal affairs division?" "Yes, sir. Of course we do." "Good, because you're going to need them. I want a copy of Officer Miller's complete service record, including any and all civilian complaints, on my desk by Monday morning. I want all dash cam footage from his vehicle and all body cam footage from this evening. I want every piece of paper he filled out related to my arrest, and I want the names of every officer who witnessed this charade and did nothing." The captain nodded frantically, a puppet on a string. "Yes, sir. Absolutely. Anything you need." "You have a choice to make, Captain," I said, walking slowly towards the exit, my footsteps echoing on the linoleum floor. "You can either clean your own house, or I will come back with a federal warrant and a team of agents who will do it for you. And trust me," I paused at the door, turning to look back at the assembled officers, "we are very, very thorough." The door swung shut behind me, and I was finally out in the cool night air. The thunderstorm had broken while I was inside, washing the world clean. The smell of rain on hot asphalt filled my lungs. My Lexus was parked at the curb, gleaming under a street lamp. A young, nervous-looking deputy stood beside it, holding the door open for me. He wouldn't make eye contact. I got in, started the engine, and pulled away from the curb, leaving the police station and its career-ending catastrophe in my rearview mirror. The drive to my sister's house was a blur. The adrenaline that had sustained me for the past 2 hours began to recede, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion and a cold, simmering rage. It wasn't just about me. It was about the terrifying abuse of power I had just witnessed. Miller hadn't seen a federal prosecutor. He'd seen a black man in a luxury car, and his prejudice had filled in the rest of the story. How many others had he done this to? How many people who didn't have the U.S. attorney on speed dial? People whose lives he had ruined on a whim, backed by the power of a badge and a gun. When I finally arrived, the party was winding down. My sister met me at the door, her face a mask of worry. "Mark, where have you been? We were so worried." I hugged her tightly. "Long story, Jen. I'll tell you later. Is there any cake left?" The weekend passed in a haze of family and forced normalcy, but my mind was elsewhere. On Monday morning, I was in my office before the sun came up, a cup of scalding black coffee in my hand. Piled on my desk was everything I had requested from the captain. Miller's service record was a horror show. 12 civilian complaints for excessive force, illegal searches, and racial profiling. Every single one of them had been dismissed. Unsubstantiated. Lack of evidence. It was a textbook case of a department protecting one of its own, but they couldn't protect him from me. I spent the next month building my case, not a criminal case that would be handled by the state. I was building a civil rights lawsuit, a Section 1983 claim for the deprivation of rights under color of law. I wasn't just going after Miller. I was going after the whole department for fostering a culture that allowed a man like him to flourish. I documented everything. The illegal stop, the fabricated probable cause, the false arrest, the pattern of abuse hidden in his file. I deposed every officer who was on duty that night. I interviewed every person who had ever filed a complaint against Miller. The state finally fired him. The department settled my civil suit before it ever got to court, terrified of what would come out in discovery. They offered me a substantial sum, hoping to make it all go away quietly. But it was never about the money for me. It was about the principle. It was about ensuring that what happened to me could never happen to anyone else in that district again. 2 years passed. Life moved on. I won more cases. I lost a few. Officer Miller became a bad memory, a footnote in a successful career. I almost forgot his face. Almost. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, I was walking back from the courthouse, heading to a nearby deli for a sandwich. It was a beautiful day, the kind that makes you forget the city's grime. I was crossing the street, lost in thought about a witness testimony, when a taxi screeched to a halt just inches from me, its horn blaring. I jumped back onto the curb, my heart pounding. The passenger window rolled down. "Watch where you're going, pal," a man's voice snarled. I looked at the driver, ready to offer a sheepish apology. But it wasn't the driver who had yelled. It was the man in the back seat. He was wearing a cheap suit and a bitter expression. It took me a second to place him without the police uniform, without the swagger. But then I saw it. The buzz cut, the thick neck, the deep-seated resentment in his eyes. It was Miller, and he recognized me at the exact same moment. The anger on his face curdled into something else, something far more venomous. It was pure, undiluted hatred. "You," he hissed, his voice a low growl. "You're the one who ruined my life." He threw a few crumpled bills at the taxi driver. "I'm getting out here." The taxi pulled away, leaving Miller standing on the sidewalk not 10 feet from me. The bustling city street seemed to fade away. There was no one around but us. He took a step towards me, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. "You cost me everything," he said, his voice trembling with rage. "My job, my pension, my house, everything. You think you can just walk away from that?" He took another step, closing the distance between us. And that's when I saw it. Tucked into the waistband of his cheap trousers, partially hidden by his suit jacket, was the unmistakable black grip of a handgun. My blood ran cold. The sounds of the city, the distant sirens, the chatter of pedestrians, the rumble of traffic, all dissolved into a dull, roaring hum in my ears. There was only Miller. His face was a twisted mask of fury, his eyes burning with a desperate, unhinged light. This wasn't a disgruntled ex-cop anymore. This was a man with nothing left to lose, and in his mind, I was the one who had taken it all. My prosecutor's brain, the one trained to analyze, assess, and react, kicked into overdrive. I ran through the options in a nanosecond. Yell for help? He'd pull the gun before anyone could react. Run. He was closer to me than the nearest storefront, and I didn't trust my chances of outrunning a bullet. I had one advantage. He was consumed by rage, and rage makes people sloppy. I needed to keep him talking. "Your life wasn't ruined, Miller," I said, my voice shockingly calm. I took a half step back, a small, non-threatening movement, putting a little more space between us while subtly angling my body away from his dominant hand. "You threw it away. You did this to yourself. One bad traffic stop at a time. I was just the one who finally held up the mirror." "Lies," he spat, spittle flying from his lips. He took another menacing step forward. "You with your fancy car and your fancy suit. You think you're better than me. You lawyers are all the same, twisting things, making guys like me the bad guy." "Was I the bad guy when you planted evidence on me?" I asked, keeping my tone conversational, almost therapeutic. "Was I the bad guy for all those other people, Miller? The ones whose complaints you buried? The ones who didn't know who to call when you violated their rights on the side of a highway?" His hand twitched toward his waistband. This was it, the tipping point. "You don't even know their names, do you?" I pressed on, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "But I do. I read every single one of their files. I spoke to them. You weren't a cop, Miller. You were a bully with a badge, and the system that protected you is broken. You're not a victim. You're a symptom." Something in my words, in the cold, hard truth of them, seemed to pierce through his rage. His eyes lost a fraction of their focus. A flicker of confusion crossed his face. It was the opening I needed. In that moment of hesitation, I didn't charge him. I didn't run. I simply reached into my suit pocket, pulled out my phone, and held it up. "It's been recording for the last 2 minutes, Miller," I said, my voice flat and devoid of emotion. "Every threat, every word. And I can promise you, my colleagues at the FBI will be very interested in the part where a disgraced former police officer threatens a federal prosecutor while illegally carrying a concealed weapon." His eyes darted from my face to the phone and back again. The fury was still there, but now it was laced with the cold, familiar poison of fear. He saw the trap. He wasn't a cop on the side of a deserted highway anymore. He was a lone man on a busy city street, standing in front of the one person who knew exactly how to dismantle him, piece by piece, using the very laws he once swore to uphold. The rage that had propelled him forward now held him in place, a deer in the headlights of his own impending doom. He stared at me for a long, silent moment. The hatred was still there, a simmering coal in his eyes, but the fire was gone. Defeat settled over his features, heavy and absolute. Without another word, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the anonymous midday crowd. Just another angry man lost in the city. I stood there for a full minute, my hand trembling as I lowered the phone. I hadn't been recording. It was a bluff, but it was a bluff that had worked because it was based on the world he understood, a world of evidence, procedure, and consequences. The world I had forced him back into. That evening, I didn't go straight home. I drove to the federal building, took the elevator up to my office, and stood at the window, looking out over the sprawling city lights. I thought about Miller, and for the first time, I felt a sliver of something that wasn't anger. It was a profound sadness. He was a casualty of a broken system, both its perpetrator and, ultimately, its victim. The next day, I used the settlement money, all $4.2 million of it, to seed a new foundation. We called it the Miller Project, though he would never know. Its mission was twofold: to provide pro bono legal services for victims of police misconduct, and to fund independent, civilian-led oversight committees for local police departments. It was never about the money or the revenge. It was about fixing the cracks in the foundation so that men like Miller couldn't thrive in the darkness anymore. My encounter with him on the street was the last I ever saw or heard of the man. But his story, and what it represented, never left me. It became the fuel for my work, a constant reminder that the law is not just a weapon to be wielded in a courtroom, but a shield to protect the innocent. It's a shield I now spend my life trying to reinforce, one case, one reform, one story at a time. The world isn't perfect, but you don't walk away from the fight. You stand your ground, you use your voice, and you hope that by holding up a mirror, you can force the monsters to finally see their own reflection.